She tried not to stare. Everything she had ever been taught, every warning from her superiors, every fear that had kept her alive for months, screamed at her to look away. But she couldn't. The photograph was achingly beautiful and utterly disarming, a glimpse into a life she had never known but had been taught to resent. Greta Weiss, a young German prisoner of war, stood frozen in the dim light of the British POW camp, her breath hitching as she took in the sight before her. The camp was a stark contrast to the vibrant images of Germany she had grown up with. Barbed wire, mud, and makeshift tents formed the backdrop of her new reality in 1945. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and the metallic tang of fear. Heavy clouds hung low in the grey sky, mirroring the weight pressing down on her heart. It was a day like any other, but the photograph, cradled in the calloused hands of Private James Thompson, a British soldier, was about to change everything. Greta's gaze flickered to Thompson's face, his expression softening as he watched her reaction. He was a man shaped by the war, his uniform frayed, his eyes weary, but even beneath the grime of battle there was a kindness that shone through. "This is my family," he said, his voice a gentle murmur against the backdrop of clattering metal and distant shouts from guards. "My wife and children." As she looked at the photograph again, the smiles of Thompson's family seemed to light up the dreary camp. A little girl with pigtails, a woman with warm eyes, and a boy caught mid-laugh. All of them radiated joy, blissfully unaware of the turmoil that enveloped their world. Greta's heart raced. She had been taught to see these men as monsters, opponents devoid of humanity. Yet here was a soldier sharing his heart with her, a mere enemy prisoner. This single moment would redefine her entire world. Before we uncover why, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, back to 1945. The situation was precarious. Germany lay in ruins, and the war's end was a palpable tension in the air. Greta, just 23, had always envisioned herself as part of a cause that she believed was righteous. The ideals of Nazi Germany had been deeply ingrained in her upbringing: patriotism, loyalty, and a fierce disdain for the Allies. But here, in this camp, with the sound of distant artillery fading into the background, she began to question everything. Her life had always been dictated by the propaganda she consumed. Raised in a small town in Bavaria, Greta was the daughter of a schoolteacher who had instilled in her a sense of duty to the fatherland. The fervent nationalism that surrounded her had shaped her identity, filling her with pride, but also with fear. She remembered the fervent rallies, the speeches echoing through the streets, the way the crowd's cheers would send shivers down her spine. It had all seemed so noble then, yet now she stood among the remnants of that belief, a prisoner in a camp that held her captive not just in body, but in spirit. The conditions were harsh, food was scarce, and the cold seeped into her bones. Each day blurred into the next, filled with the monotonous routine of survival. But it was not just the physical hardships that gnawed at her. It was the gnawing conflict within, the dissonance between how she was raised to view the world and the reality that lay before her. As the days passed, anxiety grew among the prisoners. Rumors swirled about potential transfers, about how the Allies were treating captured soldiers. Greta overheard hushed conversations, the husky whispers of fear and uncertainty. What awaited them on the other side of the camp fence? Would they be sent to a worse fate, one that would strip away what little dignity remained? But even within that fear, there was a flicker of curiosity, a desire to understand the enemy that had become so abstract and terrifying. She found herself watching the British soldiers more intently, searching for signs of the monsters she had been taught to fear. Instead, she saw men who were weary, men who laughed and shared stories amongst themselves, who showed kindness to each other amidst the chaos of war. And then there was Thompson. In the quiet moments when the guards were distracted, she caught glimpses of his humanity. The way he helped his fellow soldiers, sharing rations or offering a comforting word, the way he looked at her now, with a softness that disarmed her, made her heart race in a manner that felt both thrilling and terrifying. As she stood there, caught in a web of confusion, Greta felt the weight of her upbringing bearing down on her. Could she allow herself to feel compassion for the enemy? Could she reconcile the image of the soldier before her with the monstrous figure painted in the propaganda she had consumed? Torn between loyalty to her homeland and a burgeoning sense of empathy, she fought to keep her emotions at bay. But as she gazed at the photograph, The warmth radiating from Thompson's family seeped into her heart, rendering her defenses fragile. She felt the first stirrings of doubt in the beliefs she had held so close to her chest. Would she betray her own if she acknowledged the humanity of the enemy? The struggle within her was intense, a battle of ideologies clashing amid the rubble of her beliefs. In that moment, as the photograph hung suspended between them, Greta felt the ground beneath her shift. The war had taught her to see black and white, to draw stark lines between friend and foe. But here, in the dim light of the camp, she was confronted with a truth that was infinitely more complex. There was no simple enemy. There was only humanity, raw and unfiltered, staring back at her through the eyes of a soldier who had shared his heart. As she stood there, caught in the gravity of the moment, she felt something inside her begin to crack. The tears welled up in her eyes, unbidden and heavy, as the realization washed over her. This was not how it was supposed to be. The monsters were supposed to be those who wore the uniforms of the opposing side, yet here was a man who had opened his heart to her. What would happen next? Would she allow herself to embrace this new understanding, or would she retreat back into the armor of her indoctrination? The photograph flickered in her mind as she wrestled with the enormity of the moment, a moment that had the power to reshape her entire world. The camp was a stark contrast to the vibrant life captured in the photograph. Muddy paths wound between rows of hastily constructed tents, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and smoke. Beyond the barbed wire fence, the distant sound of laughter and conversation wafted from the British soldiers, a reminder of the world outside, one that felt almost fantastical to Greta now. She blinked rapidly, trying to process the emotions swirling within her. This was the moment that would redefine her world. Before delving deeper into her struggle, share with us in the comments where you're watching from. It's incredible to see how far these stories resonate. Greta's heart raced as she stood before Private James Thompson, the photograph still clutched in his hand. He was a soldier, yes, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he was more than just a cog in the war machine. He was a human being, just like her. This thought sent a shiver down her spine, deepening the conflict brewing within her. Years of indoctrination screamed at her to remain resolute in her beliefs, to see him as the enemy. But all she could see was the kindness etched in his features, the gentleness in the way he held the photograph. "Her name is Anna," James said softly, breaking the silence that had enveloped them. "My little girl." The tenderness in his voice was disarming, and for a moment Greta felt a pang of longing. She thought of her own family, of her mother's unwavering pride in the Reich, and how she had raised Greta to believe that the Allies were monsters, devoid of humanity. But here stood a man who loved fiercely, whose heart beat for his family, just as hers did. As the days passed, the conditions in the camp grew harsher. Rumors began to circulate among the prisoners about the potential transfer of female POWs to a more formidable camp, a place where the treatment was said to be far worse. Fear gripped Greta and her fellow prisoners, tightening like a vice around their chests. The anxiety was palpable. Whispers of desperation echoed through the tents every night. In the shadows of the camp, Greta overheard frantic discussions among her fellow prisoners. "They're moving us. I heard they don't feed the women there." One voice trembled, filled with dread. "We have to stay strong," another replied, though her voice quavered. Greta felt the weight of their terror settle upon her, amplifying her own fear. As she sat huddled in her corner, her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. What would becoming a traitor to her country mean? If she dared to show kindness toward the enemy, would she be ostracized? Would her fellow prisoners turn against her? Every previous interaction with the soldiers had been charged with suspicion, a tense dance of fear and hatred. Yet she could not shake the image of James's warm smile and the way he had spoken about his daughter. "Could I really see him as a monster?" she whispered to herself, the question echoing in the silence of her mind. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the camp, James approached her once more. This time, he held out a piece of bread, a meager offering, but it felt monumental in its significance. "You look faint, Greta," he said, concern etched on his brow. "Please take this." The gesture was simple, yet it shattered the wall she had built around herself, forcing her to confront the humanity she had been taught to ignore. She reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing against his, and for a fleeting moment, her heart raced not with fear but with a burgeoning sense of connection. In that instant, Greta felt her world tilt. What would you do in my shoes, she thought, questioning herself as she accepted the bread. What would you do if you were faced with the very enemy you were raised to despise? The question gnawed at her, an itch she could not scratch. As she chewed the dry morsel, she found herself staring into James's eyes, searching for answers. "Why do you help us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because we're all human, Greta," he replied, his tone earnest. "You're not my enemy, this war is." His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. Greta felt a rush of emotions she could hardly articulate: confusion, fear, and something new, something that tasted faintly of hope. The lines between enemy and ally blurred, and she was left grappling with her identity. Days turned into weeks, and the impending threat of the transfer loomed ever larger. Greta's thoughts spiraled as she witnessed acts of humanity from the British soldiers that further complicated her perception of them. A medic bandaged a fellow prisoner's wounds with gentle care, a soldier shared his meager rations, and laughter occasionally erupted amidst the despair. Each act chipped away at the fortress of belief she had built, replacing her hatred with an uncomfortable sense of empathy. Greta found herself observing James more closely, noting the way he interacted with his fellow soldiers, his laughter, his kindness, and the way he shared stories of his family. Yet with each passing day, her internal conflict deepened. In the quiet moments when she lay on her cot, the shadows of doubt crept in. What if her fellow prisoners were right? What if showing kindness meant betraying her country? The fear of isolation loomed large, threatening to swallow her whole. Still, the kindness of James and the other soldiers gnawed at her conscience. She had never been taught to consider the enemy as people with families, dreams, and fears like her own. The struggle raged on within her, a battle between loyalty and compassion. "Can I really be a traitor for feeling this way?" she pondered, her heart aching with the weight of her uncertainty. What would you do in her shoes? Share your thoughts below. As she grappled with these questions, the stakes continued to rise, and Greta knew that her struggle was far from over. The sun dipped below the horizon once more, and as darkness blanketed the camp, Greta sat alone in her thoughts, her heart heavy with the burden of her conscience. Would she be able to reconcile her past with the present? Would she find a way to embrace the humanity in those she had been taught to hate? Join us as we continue this story of transformation and discovery. If you find these narratives important and wish to support our mission of bringing forgotten histories to light, please subscribe to our channel. Together we can explore the depths of humanity and empathy that emerge even in the darkest of times. Thank you for watching. Greta's heart raced as her gaze remained locked on the photograph that Private Thompson held in his hands. The image was a stark reminder of all she had been taught to despise. A woman with dark, flowing hair smiled brightly, her arms wrapped around two small children, their faces lit with the innocence of youth. It was a scene from another world, a world that felt foreign and distant, yet so painfully close in that moment. The soldier's eyes, a deep shade of blue, held a kindness that pierced through the fog of her indoctrination. This couldn't be right. These were the monsters, weren't they? The thought echoed in her mind, a cacophony of confusion and fear. Her breath hitched as she wrestled with the reality before her. The soldier, this Private Thompson, was not the faceless enemy she had been trained to hate. He was flesh and blood, warmth and compassion, standing just a few feet away, willing to share his rations with her. The cold wind swept through the camp, carrying the distant sounds of other prisoners murmuring, their voices laced with uncertainty. Greta's eyes flickered to the barbed wire that surrounded them, a physical manifestation of her confinement and the invisible chains of hatred that had bound her thoughts for so long. She could feel the weight of her fellow prisoners' stares, an invisible pressure urging her to turn away, to adhere to the beliefs she had grown up with. Yet she remained transfixed. Suddenly the guard's whistle pierced the air, a sharp and shrill warning that sent a ripple of anxiety through the camp. Greta's heart sank as she remembered the stories of brutalities inflicted upon those who dared to show kindness. She could almost hear the whispers of her comrades, warning against such acts of treachery. "You'll be marked as a traitor," they would say. But in this moment, the true betrayal felt like denying the very humanity that stood before her. "Here, take it," Thompson said softly, breaking the silence that had enveloped them. He extended the small piece of bread towards her, his expression earnest and sincere. "You need it more than I do." Greta's hands trembled as she reached out, her fingers brushing against his. The warmth of his skin sent an electric shock through her. igniting a spark of something she hadn't felt in ages. Hope. Hope for kindness. Hope for understanding. But alongside it swirled a tempest of guilt and fear. What would her comrades think? What would her family say if they could see her now, standing before the enemy, accepting their food? As she took the piece of bread, a wave of nausea washed over her. The taste of betrayal lingered on her tongue, but it was quickly overshadowed by a deeper, more visceral sensation. She was starving not just for food, but for connection, for understanding, for a glimpse of humanity in a world that had painted it black and white. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, a tremor of vulnerability escaping her lips. Thompson's expression softened further, and for a moment the war around them faded away. "Because we're not so different, you and I," he replied gently. "We're all just trying to survive in this madness." His words struck a chord deep within her. She had been conditioned to see the British as inhuman, as the enemy who had brought destruction upon her homeland. Yet here was Thompson, a man who understood suffering, who offered her a lifeline in the form of bread, and with it, a piece of himself. A sudden rush of memories flooded her mind. The propaganda films, the speeches filled with hatred, the images of Allied soldiers painted as monsters. All of it crashed down like a house of cards, leaving her breathless in the wake of realization. She had been blind, ensnared by the very narratives that had shaped her existence. Before she could process it further, a commotion erupted nearby. Greta turned her head sharply to see a group of soldiers approaching, their laughter ringing through the air like a death knell. They were rougher, more hardened than Thompson, their eyes reflecting the scars of war, and their presence shifted the atmosphere. "Hey, what's going on here?" one of them barked, eyeing the scene with suspicion. "Thompson, what are you doing with that kraut?" Greta's heart sank, the camaraderie between the soldiers fading into a palpable tension. She could feel the threat looming, her instincts screaming at her to retreat, to hide the kindness she had just encountered. Thompson's demeanor shifted instantly, his expression hardening as he stood protectively in front of her. "Just sharing some rations, nothing more," he replied, but the quiver in his voice betrayed his unease. "Sharing? With the enemy?" The soldier scoffed, taking a step closer, his body language aggressive. "You must be losing your mind, mate." Greta felt the blood rush to her face, a hot wave of shame washing over her. She was the enemy, and yet here was Thompson, defending her. Her heart pounded in her chest, caught between the desire to flee and the need to stand her ground. "Enough!" Thompson's voice rang out, stronger now, a protective shield around her. "She's a person, just like us. She deserves to eat, just like us." The silence that followed was thick with tension, the other soldier's eyes narrowing as he weighed Thompson's words. Greta could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the judgment, the fear of what it meant to show compassion towards someone they were taught to hate. In that moment, Greta made a choice. She stepped out from behind Thompson, her heart thundering in her ears. "I'm not your enemy," she declared, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm just a woman trying to survive, just like you." The soldiers exchanged glances, surprise flickering across their faces. The atmosphere shifted, and for a moment, the lines drawn by war blurred, giving way to a shared humanity that had been buried beneath layers of hatred and fear. Yet just as hope began to bloom in the cracks of despair, the unexpected happened. Another guard, one she recognized, stormed into the scene, a furious expression plastered across his face. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his eyes locking onto Greta. "Sir, just a misunderstanding," Thompson started, but the guard cut him off. "Misunderstanding? You're fraternizing with the enemy." He advanced towards them, his voice low and threatening. "You know the punishment for this." Greta's heart raced as the realization of their precarious situation hit her. This was not just about her. It was about Thompson, too. The kindness he had shown could cost him everything. "No," she shouted, desperation flooding her voice. "It was my fault. I asked him for food. I didn't mean to cause trouble." The guard's eyes narrowed and he stepped closer, towering over her. "You want to play the hero for the enemy. You'll both regret it." As the guard reached for his baton, Greta's mind raced. In one devastating moment, everything she had thought she knew shattered. The humanity she had glimpsed in Thompson, the connection they had forged, was now a target for the brutal reality of war. But then, out of nowhere, Thompson stepped between them, unwavering, his posture defiant. "If you want to punish someone, then punish me," he said, a sense of calm settling over him despite the storm brewing around them. "I won't let you hurt her." Greta's breath caught in her throat, a mixture of fear and awe enveloping her. Here was a soldier, risking everything for her, a German POW. It was a moment that defied all logic, all reason, and in that instant she saw the truth. There was no enemy here, only people caught in a web of circumstances, desperately trying to find a way to survive. "Move aside, Thompson," the guard spat, his patience waning. "No," Greta interjected, her voice rising with newfound strength. "You don't understand. He's not my enemy. He's my friend." The word hung in the air, heavy with significance. It was a truth that had taken root in her heart, a flicker of hope that illuminated the darkness around them. The guard hesitated, confusion etched across his face. The tension was electric, the silence thick as they all waited for the next move. Greta could feel the eyes of her fellow prisoners on her, the weight of their expectations pressing down. Then, in a moment that felt suspended in time, Thompson turned to her, his gaze steady and reassuring. "You're not alone, Greta," he whispered, and his words wrapped around her like a warm embrace. And just like that, everything shifted. The guard's stance faltered, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "What are you two playing at?" he demanded. But the strength of their connection had already begun to chip away at the walls of enmity. Greta took a step forward, her voice unwavering. "We're human beings, and we deserve to see each other as such. No more hatred, no more fear." In that moment, the world around her faded. The barbed wire, the mud, the looming shadows of war, all of it slipped away, leaving only the warmth of understanding and shared humanity. And then, as if released from an invisible grip, the guard stepped back, uncertainty overwhelming his aggression. "Get back to your posts," he muttered, tension easing from his voice as he turned away. As the guard retreated, the air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifting for the first time. Greta and Thompson stood together, and she knew that something profound had shifted within her. But just as hope began to blossom, the realization hit her like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a moment of kindness, it was a turning point that could cost them both dearly. Greta's heart ached as she looked into Thompson's eyes, the connection forged in adversity binding them together. She understood now that this was only the beginning. The war was still raging, and the challenges ahead were insurmountable. But as she grasped his hand tightly, a glimmer of hope ignited within her. In a world torn apart by division, they had chosen to see each other, to embrace the humanity that lay beneath the surface of conflict. And in that choice, they had found a glimmer of light in the darkness. The path ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but the seeds of change had been sown. Greta took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead, knowing that she was no longer alone in this fight. Together, they would navigate the complexities of their world, one act of humanity at a time. Greta's gaze flickered between the photograph and the soldier's eyes, overwhelmed by an emotional tempest as she struggled to reconcile the image of a smiling family with the hardened reality of war. The photograph depicted a woman radiant with joy, cradling two children, whose laughter seemed to echo in the air around her. The moment of tenderness captured in that image stood in stark contrast to the suffering and chaos that surrounded Greta. As she stood there, tears began to form, blurring her vision. These were the monsters, and weren't they? She thought, her heart racing as she felt a wave of disorientation wash over her. The years of indoctrination, the propaganda that painted the British as the enemy, all crashed down around her like a fragile house of cards. How could she have been so wrong? "What's your name?" Private Thompson asked gently, breaking through the noise in her mind. His voice was laced with an unexpected warmth, a stark deviation from the coldness she had long associated with the enemy. "Greta," she whispered, the sound barely escaping her lips. With a slight nod, she finally allowed herself to meet his gaze, searching for answers in the depths of his kind eyes. "Greta," he repeated as if cherishing the name. "This is my family." He gestured to the photograph, his expression softening. "And they're waiting for me to come home." Greta felt a pang of empathy that surprised her. Here was a soldier, a man she had been conditioned to hate, revealing his vulnerability. She had always imagined the enemy as a faceless entity, devoid of emotions, but now she saw the truth. Behind the uniform, there was a human being, just like her. In that fleeting moment, a bond began to form, one that transcended the barriers of war. Greta took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of her past beliefs begin to lift. I never thought you could be," she faltered. The words stuck in her throat. "Human," he finished for her, a hint of understanding in his voice. "I know it's hard to believe, but we all have families, love, and hopes for the future, just like you." The kindness in his words ignited something within her, a flicker of hope mixed with the grief of all that had been lost. Greta's heart ached, realizing how many moments of humanity she had overlooked in her blind adherence to hatred. "I'm sorry," she managed, the apology resonating with the weight of 1,000 unspoken regrets. For days that followed, Greta found herself seeking the company of the British soldiers, a forbidden curiosity drawing her closer to their world. She watched them as they shared rations, laughed around makeshift fires, and tended to each other's wounds. Each interaction chipped away at the walls she had built around her heart, exposing her to a reality that was far more complex than the narratives she had long accepted. One afternoon, while handing over a mug of water to Private Thompson, she hesitated. "Do you ever think about what happens after the war?" she asked, her voice trembling with the weight of her question. Thompson paused, his gaze thoughtful as he considered her words. "Every day, I think about going home to my family, but I also think about rebuilding. We'll need to learn to live together again, to remember that we're not enemies, we're just people caught in a terrible time." Greta felt a sense of urgency rising within her. "How do we do that?" she asked, her heart racing with a longing for change. "By sharing our stories," he replied, his voice steady, "by learning from each other, and by embracing our shared humanity. We may have fought on opposite sides, but we both crave the same things: love, peace, and understanding." Those words resonated deeply within Greta. She realized that her journey was not just about her own transformation, but about fostering connections that could bridge the divide created by war. It was then that she resolved to share her experiences, to speak out against the hate she had once embraced. In the weeks that followed, as the war came to an end, Greta became a voice for reconciliation among the prisoners. She organized gatherings where soldiers from both sides could share their stories, allowing them to see each other not as enemies, but as fellow human beings. The day she stood before a mixed group of German and British soldiers, she felt a surge of empowerment. "We cannot change the past," she said, her voice clear and strong, "but we can choose how we move forward. Let us remember that behind every uniform is a person with dreams, fears, and loved ones. We must not allow hatred to define us any longer." As she spoke, Greta caught sight of Private Thompson in the crowd, his smile encouraging her to continue. That moment marked a significant shift within her, transforming her from a prisoner of war into a champion of peace. Years later, as the echoes of the war faded into history, Greta found herself reflecting on the journey she had undertaken. She had spent her life advocating for understanding and compassion, sharing her story in schools and communities, ensuring that the lessons learned from her past would never be forgotten. In a moving speech at a peace conference, she concluded with a powerful message: "It is easy to see the enemy in others, it is easy to hate, but true courage lies in the ability to love. Love breaks down the barriers that divide us, and it is our responsibility to nurture that love in the world." As the audience erupted in applause, Greta felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. She had transformed from a woman filled with fear and prejudice into an advocate for empathy and understanding. Her journey was not just her own. It was a testament to the power of human connection, a reminder that kindness can emerge even in the darkest of times. In this age of uncertainty, Greta's story resonates as a beacon of hope. It reminds us that behind the uniforms, the flags, and the ideologies, there are always human beings. By sharing our stories and embracing our shared humanity, we can heal the wounds of the past and build a better future together. If you believe that these forgotten histories need to be told, that we must learn from them to build a better future, then join our community of history lovers by subscribing to the channel. Help us continue to bring these vital stories out of the shadows. Thank you for watching.